Hey everybody! I'm super late and then I decided to go live even though I was going to record today because I've realized that Saturdays are not the best days, but as it turned out this week, it was. So today we're going to talk about Lord of the Flies, chapters 5, 6, 7, and 8. But first, as always, I want to share something about me with you. So when I made my first episode, I think that was, or maybe second episode, I showed you my books. And I promised that eventually I would show you my china cabinet of rare and precious books. So my students have heard about this over the years, and now you get to see inside my china cabinet of new and rare, my china cabinet of special books. All right, so here we go. It's right behind me. Alrighty, let's see. I think I can turn this around. Ha! How about that? All right, so here's my china cabinet of rare and special books. Ah, it lights up too, which is pretty fabulous. In fact, I think I'm gonna light it up for this occasion because it's a special occasion and guests are coming in to see. Oh, look at that. It's a shining beacon of fantasticness. So this is where I keep all the books that are particularly special for me. So I'll point out a few that I really, really love that are super special. So right here, oh, there we go, is a second edition of Tennyson poems. And I love Tennyson. One of my favorite poems when I was growing up was The Lady of Shalott by Tennyson. And so a friend of mine gave me that book when I was in graduate school. And then a couple others that are really special to me. This is an Absalom first edition by William Faulkner. And anyone who knows me knows that I love William Faulkner. And so a very dear student, Kirsten, gave me that book years ago. So those are a couple that are super special to me. This Prince and the Pauper by Mark Twain is quite old. And I also have a super old Gulliver's Travels somewhere in here as well. Oh, it's here. Look how pretty the spine is. I just love it. When we were cleaning out this room, I opened it up and took a big smell. And my husband looked at me like I was crazy, but I love the smell of old book and new book. So these are some of my special ones. And then below we have, oh, look, it's me. Hey guys. These are extra special for various reasons. Most of them are signed. So the Jimmy Carter is signed. The Essie Mae book is signed. Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children, that's a signed one. I love that book. Tender is the Night, that one's not signed, but it was purchased for me at Shakespeare & Company in Paris by one of my fantastic students. The Firebrand Legacy was written by one of my former students and signed. The Spy is signed, and I love this writer. His book, The Alchemist, if you haven't read it, maybe we'll read it as part of this group because it is truly, wow, it's a life-changing book. The Old Possum's Book of Practical Cats is signed not by T.S. Eliot, so don't get too excited, but it is signed by the illustrator. In fact, I'll show that one to you. And then the one on top was bought for me on the West Bank in Paris by a former student as well. So this one is pretty precious. This was given to me by my high school boyfriend. And it is signed by Edward Corey, who is the illustrator, and he's quite a famous artist. So that one's super special. But the two that are in here that are most special, and so they sit on their own, are Sweet Divinity, because I wrote that, and then this copy of Night, which is also signed by Elie Wiesel. And this is incredibly precious to me because I'm not sure a book has impacted me in my life quite the way that that one has. And then at last I have the bottom, which is where I have these random science-y books. So that's more my husband's jam. And then just some sort of special editions of books that I've loved along the way. And my mother's 3-volume set of Return of the King. So this is my china cabinet of rare and special books. And oh gosh, I just love it. It makes me so happy. I come and look at it and it just brings me joy. So yeah, so there's a little tidbit about me for the day. Alrighty, now to our book. Let's see if I can got you propped up on some paint cans because we've been painting. Well, we haven't been painting. My husband's been painting. I have to give him credit for that. All right. Okay. So we left off last week. We had read chapters 1 through 4 of Lord of the Flies. And if you're joining us for the first time, we are currently reading Lord of the Flies. And I'm talking a little bit about how we really actively read literature, how to analyze literature, some common tropes and archetypes and symbols that we find in literature. And we're looking at a book that I chose because it's a book that's typically assigned but not often read by English teachers. And I know a thing or two about that. So last week we started the first 4 chapters of Lord of the Flies. This week we'll talk about chapters 5, 6, 7, and 8. And then for next week we're going to finish this novel up, 9, 10, 11, and 12. I'm pretty sure that gets us, yes, to the very end of Lord of the Flies. And we'll kind of wrap it up together next week and move on to the next book. The next book's going to be my novel, Sweet Divinity, because that was asked for, so which is very flattering and humbling. And so we'll talk about that one next, and then we'll do something a little more classic-ish again, and we're going to read all kinds of stuff. So if you have suggestions of what you would like for us to read and study, maybe a book that you were assigned in school and maybe you read it, but you want to read it differently, or if you're one of my former students, a book that I taught you and you think there was probably still a whole lot we could have gone through in that book. If we had free speech to talk about everything, we can do that too. Or maybe a book that's just come out that we all need to read and talk about. I've read some books lately that I wish I had somebody to talk about them with, because there was one I read and it won the Nobel Prize, and it was called Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead. And I just really don't know how I felt about that book. I may have loved it. I may want my life back. Like, I'm honestly not sure. So if there's a book like that for you too, go ahead and suggest it. You can leave it in the comments or send me a message and we'll see what we can do. All right, so tonight with Lord of the Flies, when we left off last time, we had talked about the setting quite a bit on the island and the idea of isolation. We talked about the main characters also and the dynamics there, particularly this sort of duality between Ralph and Jack. We of course talked about Piggy and Simon as well. And we began to delve into the theme of civilization versus savagery, which is sort of the broad way of discussing it. But really what the book's getting at, which I think is even more apparent in these next chapters, is at the core, are humans, are we really that civilized? Is that really our nature? Is that inherent in us? Or is our nature something a little bit darker? And we'll talk about that tonight, because that comes pretty front and center. So we'll go kind of chronologically through, I think, tonight, because really it's all starting to build up now as we go through the book. And I hope you enjoyed the 2 chapters that are presented as a pairing, Beast from Water, Beast from Air. Those are both, of course, very fundamental elements as well. And so in Beast from Water, I wanted to start in like the 3rd page of the chapter in my book, which is this one. We'll talk about that cover at some point too, because it's fantastic. And that's, as far as I know, the original. Oh, I love you too. And yes, come back anytime for lit class. And be safe out there tonight. This is one of my former students who works as a police officer, and she's amazing. And take care of yourself. And I'm thinking of you. All right, so on page 78 in my green book. So this is early on into your reading for this week. But here we really have, this is Ralph, and he's contemplating at the start. And this is what he says, or he thinks, the narrator tells us. Once more that evening, Ralph had to adjust his values. Piggy could think. He could go step by step inside that fat head of his, only Piggy was no chief. But Piggy, for all his ludicrous body, had brains. Ralph was a specialist in thought now, and could recognize thought in another. The sun in his eyes reminded him how time was passing, so he took the conch down from the tree and examined the surface. Exposure to the air had bleached the yellow and pink to near white in transparency. Ralph felt a kind of affectionate reverence for the conch, although there's a misprint in my book and it says couch. I read that like 4 times the other day because I was so confused, and then I realized it was a typo, which makes me feel better about the typos in my book, but I digress. Even though he had fished the thing out of the lagoon himself, he faced the place of assembly and put the conch to his lips. So you have this introspection in Ralph, and he's right before this, he's thinking about how if you're going to be a chief, you have to be able to think, and how this is really Piggy's gift. And we'll talk a little bit more about Piggy in a few minutes, about the association of Piggy with science too. But he's thinking about Piggy, you know, and how he calls it his ludicrous body. But Piggy is a character who is, at times, he's frustrating. He will, you know, but I'm holding the conch. I mean, I don't know how many times he says this in the book. And you can imagine a group of adolescent boys all gathered together. And we all know Piggy's like an archetype in many ways for that kid who gets picked on, who's inevitably in a group like this and, you know, wants so much to be respected. But, you know, over and over with it, but I got the conch, but I'm holding the conch. You're like, oh, Piggy, right? But here Ralph, you know, acknowledges that Piggy is smart. And we talked about that last time. Piggy's reasonable about a lot of things. He's very much the voice of reason in this book. We talked about that with the glasses, and those are going to become really important again as well. So make sure you're paying attention to the glasses with Piggy, and I put mine on tonight as well. But then also, when he picks up the conch in this moment, as we read the rest of this book, really pay attention to the conch. We talked about it last week a little bit, and how the conch is very much symbolic of power, or control or dominance. You can fill in the blank with the word you think is most appropriate for it. But it allows someone to have the rapt attention of the other boys in the island. It calls people to them. It really does hold a lot of power at this point still, the conch. And yet, when Ralph picks up the conch and holds it, he sees that it's being bleached and it's transparent, and he's described as having a affectionate reverence for the conch. And so he has a reverence for what it is, more so for what it symbolizes. But the conch itself is, it's changing. It's not the same color. It's getting thinner. And we see, once you've read the rest of these chapters, that as is Ralph's position on the island, as is the civilized behaviors of these boys. So the conch is very representative, certainly of something like power, but as it begins to fade and to thin and to become fragile, so do all the things associated with it, the power and the civilized ways that they've tried to have on the island, right? So that's when they call the assembly, of course. And you begin to see in these chapters, really, actually you don't begin to see it, you see it straight out, this conflict between Ralph and Jack, you know, the hunter and the leader, and their arguments over what the best way is to go about this whole situation. If you look on page 84, which is in the same chapter, if you have different page numbers from me, let's see, this is where they're about to talk about the beast. All right, so this is the bit with Piggy. When you're done laughing, perhaps we can get on with the meeting. And if them little ones climb back on the twister again, they'll only fall off in a sec. So they might as well sit on the ground and listen. No, you have doctors for everything, even the inside of your mind. You don't really mean that we got to be frightened all the time of nothing. Life, said Piggy expansively, is scientific. That's what it is. In a year or two, when the war's over, they'll be traveling to Mars and back. I know there isn't no beast, not with claws and all that. I mean, but I know there isn't no fear either. Piggy paused. Unless, Ralph moved restlessly. Unless what? Unless we get frightened of people. Please tell me that when you read that line, you were like, if not, that's okay. We're training you. We're training you to see these big moments in literature. But think about it. We've been talking about this dynamic of people, and really what you've got here is this sort of little microcosm of humanity. Like everyone has a role to play, the scientist and the leader, the hunter and the feeler and Simon. You know, you've got little kids, you've got this sort of mid-range adolescent boys, you've got these older boys who are trying to take charge, right? I mean, there's just this is brilliant, right? And so here at this point is the beginning of what's really developing here. When Piggy says, there's no fear either unless we get frightened of people, right? That should strike you, especially because we've already talked about this theme of savagery and civilization, and we see this conflict rising between Ralph and Jack, and we see the isolation of Piggy and how Simon sort of self-isolates, like all these human dynamics. And I think as well by this point, you get a pretty good sense that Jack is really on the edge of something dark. And so when Piggy says that, it's once again this sort of, it's his wisdom, but also it's a foreshadowing of what's to come, right? It's all here. All the pieces are laid out. At one point they talk about the game of chess, and here it is. Everyone has their roles to play. The board is set, right? You've got the figures, and maybe the only thing we have to fear on this island is people, right? And on it's like a half laugh, half jeer, like, that's ridiculous, how silly. Of course, by the time you finish the chapters that you read, there's a lot to be afraid of with people on this island, right? But especially when you're reading and you're trying to find these poignant moments, if you're reading and you see a character who doesn't have a voice and they have a moment, they get the voice, they get the moment, and especially if you look at it, there's so much repetition in there, right? Unless is 3 times the word unless is used. There's dashes. It slows everything down. That means this is important. And so when Piggy says that, unless we get frightened of people, that's a moment we need to remember as we read forward. That's a little that gets turned on in the mind. So those are things you can look for when you're reading, right? Who are the characters who are always silenced? When they speak, it's important. Repetition, right? Even if it's one word like unless, that's important, right? Dashes, anything that slows down your reading, important, right? So that, I made the dog ear on that page. And I know some people don't like to dog ear their books. I totally get it. I love to dog ear my books. I got some big ones coming up here. Alrighty. So this whole discussion about the beast as well. And here's some points to ponder, right? Here we have this whole idea of the beast, and the beast has been seen, and they're discussing what the beast could be. Could it be this giant squid? My dad says there are giant squids and they can come up on land, right? Or is the beast some kind of monster that's hanging out in the forest? If anybody on here watched the show Lost, when I first watched Lost, I thought of this book all the daggum time. I don't think there was ever a scene where Sawyer was reading this book. He read a couple others, and it's very clever, the books they chose for him, which you would know if you had read them, because I geek out on stuff like that. But I thought of this one a lot with this sort of beast in the woods. And if you've not seen Lost, you really should watch it, because it's my absolute favorite television series of all time. And then we can debate the ending all day long. All right, but so here we're talking about the beast, and it's described as being like this actual physical thing, right? And they ask, it's Simon, I think, yes, who is the one who says, maybe there is a beast. And Ralph's like, Simon, you believe in this? I don't know, said Simon. His heartbeats were choking him, but the storm broke. Sit down, shut up, take the conch, shut up, sod you. And then Ralph says, hear him, he's got the conch. And Simon says, what I mean is, maybe it's only us. Nuts. That was from Piggy, shocked out of decorum. Simon went on, we can be Simon became inarticulate in his effort to express mankind's essential illness. Inspiration came to him, and then it goes forth a little bit. But think about what role Simon has in all of this. He really, and Piggy has the glasses, he has this sort of like knowledge, sort of wisdom, but I don't even know if wisdom is really the right word, because I feel like wisdom comes from experience, knowledge comes from books. But he's got that kind of, being able to see everything very reasonably. He has reason. Simon Simon's a feeler. Simon, remember, goes into the jungle and creates this sort of natural shelter for himself. He goes back to it in these chapters. And here it's Simon, who's very, very as well, right? So like Piggy, when Simon speaks, we should listen, and they would be right to listen too. And he also, but in a different way, said it's us. Like maybe the beast is us. We can be sort of, he doesn't really finish that statement, but he sees what's going on here. He sees people. He's an observer. He's a feeler. He sees the dynamics. He sees the natures of people. Like that's the kind of person that Simon is. And I love that Golding chose the name Simon. There's something about that name that evokes a connotation of innocence or simplicity. I mean, there are so many stories where there's a little boy named Simon, or even the SNL skit with Simon in the bathtub doing his drawings, which is probably too old for anyone on here to know. But it's a name that has connotations for people, and I think it's a very smart name choice for him, Simon. So yes. So, and then they start, maybe it's some kind of ghost, and they're talking about ghosts and everything else. But so this chapter, Beast from Water, and of course the conch comes from the water too. Let's not forget that, right? This is really where we're starting to get the development of this it's a worrisome development about human nature and about the conflict within us, perhaps, of these violent, instinctually harsh, I don't know the best words, feelings and actions that were drives within, right? Later, when they're in the woods and they're pretending to attack the kid Robert like he's a pig, and even it says that even Ralph has this like bloodlust all of a sudden, like they're all out in the woods and Jack says, circle up, and they're all there with their spears, and the poor kid is just like, he's traumatized, of course, because they're poking him with the spears and acting like he's a pig, and they're chanting, kill the pig, cut its throat, right? But it's a person in the middle of that circle, and how into it they are, and even Ralph having this like sort of drive for blood and violence. And there's a real suggestion there that these actions they take against the pigs, which, you can kill an animal for eating, and you can kill an animal in a can use the word humane, but the idea is, and I'm not making statements on meat eating or anything, but there are ways to go about slaughtering animals that are humane, right? We think of something like kosher, right, which takes that into account. And then there is terrifying, torturing, violently attacking. I mean, when they kill that's, I know I'm jumping ahead, but I'm going now. When they attack that sow that has all the little piglets attached, first of all, what an image, right? This is a vulnerable creature who is surrounded by even more vulnerable little creatures who are all snuggled up to it. It's this image of maternity, right? And relationship, right? And they go at that. I mean, there are pigs all around, and they go there, right? And they attack it. Jessica's got a really good point here. I wonder how I can't click see more. I don't know how to see. But yes, how at the end of the chapter, the kids keep saying that the grown-ups wouldn't quarrel, the grown-ups would know what to do. That's really important. And also because we keep getting these reminders that this is during war times, right? And so this whole, what would the grown-ups do? The grown-ups wouldn't quarrel. The grown-ups wouldn't do this. And you're like, the grown-ups are in a full-fledged war right now, right? The beast from the air who lands, right? This is a paratrooper who's dying on the mountain. It's civilization comes to the island through this man, but he's in the midst of a war, right? It's not as if some kind of savior from civilization or humanity comes to the island. It's not the savior adult. who comes to rescue them, right? It's an adult, like so many, who are involved in this war. So in that way too, I'm really glad you went ahead and brought that up. There's this assumption that the kids have that grown-ups have it all figured out, and they know how to handle these things. And in the meantime, the grown-ups are also killing each other, slaughtering each other. They're having their own conflicts of power, like the conch, right? You've got Jack and Ralph, these two different personalities fighting for dominance. This is what's going on in the world. So this book can also be very much read as this sort of microcosm of a global conflict, like the war. And so, yeah, it's curious. There are moments when they try to hold on to their sort of civilized ways, and but you can see it all falling away. Even Jack has a couple moments. There's one moment when he's sort of afraid to walk forward when they're looking for the beast. There's a couple moments where he pauses in here, and I don't know, as the reader, I think to myself, like, this is a kid. Like, these are adolescent boys who are trying to figure out, here I go. What is adolescence? You're trying to figure it out. You're trying to figure out who you are. You're trying to find your voice and your place, all these things. And they're doing it here on this island, but here it's actually sort of, it is, it's life and death. Do we focus on the fire, right? And the fire that's going to be the beacon that's going to get us back home and rescued in civilization? Or do we go over here to the fort, this fortress of sorts, or castle, which is a protection against war, right? So you've got these two additional settings, right, that are very symbolic too, right? This flame of civilization and rescue and getting home, and they'll see us, and we have to keep the fire going. It's how we cook things. It's how we have light. It's how we have heat, right? Or we're going to go to this abandoned fort that is a place that is meant to keep people out and is meant to be a bastion in the midst of a violent physical conflict, right? And so I look like some kind of animal. Kind of like a little pig. Okay, stop. So yes, you've got that all set up too, right? From the very beginning when we had Jack and Ralph, now it's growing, and you can see what's happening here. By the time that Jack goes off into the woods, there's a brief reminder that all those boys have been in the choir once, who are now his hunters. And that's interesting too, right? Because choir, like, that's something that's at its basic level, it's art. It's art and creativity and beauty, and those are often associated with civilization, the ability to create art and create beauty with the human mind and dexterity and all those things. Also, a choir has certainly a religious association with it as well, right? That there's something holy and lifting up and something outside of you and something bigger and all of that. And so here come these boys all marching in their choir, and now there's no choir anymore. They've become hunters. They're the Jack posse. It's like at the beginning of our reading where Ralph's sitting there and he realizes that his shorts, which are all torn up now, are chafing his legs, right? These sort of last vestiges of civilization, right? His pants, and they're hurting him now. I forgot to make my tea. And when they come at the end and raid the camp to take the fire, they're naked. They're naked, come running out of the woods with their paint all over the place and their spears screaming and shrieking, right? It's this whole image of a rejection of civilized behavior and civilized things that are embodied in clothes and things like that. So it's fascinating how they keep talking about the adults, like the grown-ups, right? If the grown-ups were here, and yet there are little reminders throughout that there's a bigger war going on, right? Golding doesn't want us to forget that. Like, we're isolated on the island with these kids, but he wants us to remember what's going on in the broader world. And he sends the paratrooper too for a very similar reason. On a couple other quick quotes in here, on page 92, when Piggy and Ralph were talking again about the fire, and Ralph says, he's like, Piggy says, you have to be tough now. And Ralph says, if I blow the conch and they don't come back, then we've had it. We shan't keep the fire going. We'll be like animals. We'll never be rescued. And Piggy says, if you don't blow, we'll soon be animals anyway. I can't see what they're doing, but I can hear. So it's a conversation about trying to hold on to these last vestiges of civilization that they had created on this island. There's a whole conversation later about, who built the huts and who watched the fire. And, we had order. We had a place that was the bathroom. And now y'all are just using the bathroom everywhere, right? Like animals, right? Stop and go or just keep on going, right? But we had it over there because we're civilized people. But now you guys just go all over the place, right? It's a gross example, but it is what it is. There's a whole conversation, though, about the civilization they had created, air quotes, and how it's gone. And at the end of that chapter, Beast from Water, let's see, that's when, and they've met Percival, who clearly has, a medical condition that cannot be controlled in this particular environment. And here too is what Jessica was talking about. Grown-ups know things, said Piggy. They ain't afraid of the dark. They'd meet and have tea and discuss. Then things would be all right. I'm like, but that's not what's happening in the world. They too are using fire as this sort of, as a literal weapon. The three boys stood in the darkness, striving unsuccessfully to convey the majesty of adult life. They wouldn't quarrel or break my specs or talk about a beast. If only they could get a message to us, cried Ralph. If only they could send us something grown up, a sign or something. And of course, this is when the paratrooper comes from the air and lands, right? The grown-ups wouldn't quarrel and they wouldn't break things. They wouldn't smash things. Well, they're bombing the heck out of themselves all around, right? But they don't know that. They look at the adult world and the civilized world as this goal and this, bastion of civilization, and the sign of it comes. They don't realize it, right? There's that great scene where they climb up on the mountain and see the paratrooper and they think it's the beast. And I have to wonder what the guy's thinking. Like, there he is lying. He's dying, and he opens his eyes and like the head lifts up, and I'm guessing he's alive at that point. What's he thinking? Like, oh my gosh, there are children on an abandoned island and now they're screaming and running away. Or, I don't know. All right. But so that's a big moment when the paratrooper lands. Okay, a couple, let's see. I thought I had something I wanted to say. I didn't have anything to say on that page. I just want to get to it. I'm looking at these other little quotes that I marked, because they were important. But then, for heaven's sakes, we all know we really want to get to the end of this, right? Okay, so we're going to get there. We're just going to get there. Let's see. I've talked about that. Talked about Ralph having his bloodlust. Okay, let's get to it, man. Let's get to the good stuff. Chapter 8, Gift for the Darkness. The title of the book, here it all comes. If you didn't get to chapter 8 yet, boy, you're in for it. Like, here it is. And I'm not going to pretend like I have all the answers for this or like the perfect analysis or interpretation, but I can make some suggestions at least. So, oh gosh, Simon's my favorite character in this book. I know a lot of people have a real affinity for Piggy, and I do too. And Ralph, I feel, my heart feels for the kid. He's really trying to do what he thinks is right and trying to take charge. And I feel sorry for Jack. There's an anger inside of him and a jealousy, and there's a backstory there. But there's something about Simon that always just kind of touched my heart, even when I was younger and reading this book. I think part of it is his affinity for nature and this, clearly this, I don't know if it's an intuitive relationship with nature. It's almost symbiotic in some ways. Like, I love that. I feel so, I feel this way about nature sometimes. I can hear it nudging me or feel it nudging me or hear it urging me somewhere. And I love that. I think it's beautiful because you know, we are all really part of nature. We've set ourselves apart, but I mean, we're part of it like everything else. I just got really deep and philosophical. Enough of that. It's getting too late for that in the evening. And after this, I'm going to go watch the Andrew Lloyd Webber musical of the week by Jeeves. I think it's, yes, I'm really excited. And it's a comedy, which will be good to have after this. All right, sorry. I get distracted really easily, which anyone who knows me is not surprised at all that I still haven't gotten back to the book. All right, here we go. Okay, so Simon, right? We're just kind of going to trace his steps here through this chapter. So a few pages into the chapter, and mine are on page 132 at the bottom. Simon had passed through the area of fruit trees, but today the little ones had been too busy with the fire on the beach, and they had not pursued him there. Because the kids kind of go to him too. And there's certainly a lot of scholarship written about Simon being a Christ-like figure. You know, the name is biblical. The children are always around him. He has this introspection and quietness, but also this deeper understanding of things that are beyond the corporeal world. Like his belief that there's a beast, but it's something inside of us. I mean, so that connection as well. So there's a lot written about Simon being this Christ figure, and we'll talk about this more as we go through too. He went on among the creepers until he reached the great mat that was woven by the open space and crawled inside. Beyond the screen of leaves, the sunlight pelted down, and the butterflies danced in the middle of their unending dance. He knelt down, and the arrow of the sun fell upon him. How gorgeous is this, y'all? For real. Like, there he is, the creepers, right? And outside is the sun and the butterflies. It's beautiful. I mean, it's there's something kind of original about it. Like, I wouldn't go so far as to say Garden of Eden-esque, but kind of. Like, there's something just so organically beautiful and original. That other time the air had seemed to vibrate with heat, but now it threatened. So then you have that little shift. Soon the sweat was running from his long, coarse hair. He shifted restlessly, but there was no avoiding the sun. Presently he was thirsty, and then very thirsty. He continued to sit. So Simon, who's always so in tune with nature, there he sits, but now nature is something that is threatening and frightening and sort of abrasive too. And of course you've got these parallel scenes going on. And this part of the book, I think this chapter is so well crafted. I mean, I really think it's one of the best crafted chapters in literature. But you've got this peaceful scene with Simon. It's peaceful, but there's also something really foreboding about it. And then of course you've got the parallel scene where the boys are hunting and they're killing that pig. And I'm not going to read it to you because it's just, every time I read it, it just makes me feel all icky inside. But it's this violent attack. And, you know, if you really want to get into this deep, oh, my son's calling. One moment. Yes, Jack? He wants a drink, of course. I'll bring you a drink in just a minute. Let me finish what I'm doing, okay? I'm back. I'll be there in a minute. Back to the book. All right, Lord of the Flies, here we go. All right, I don't know what I was saying. Oh, right. If you want to get really into like a deep, complex literary analysis with this, and we'll talk about this throughout this series, but there are several schools of literary analysis that you can apply to different texts. And when I teach literary analysis, I tell my students that these schools of literary analysis are sort of like a lens or a filter through which you can look at the book. It doesn't mean necessarily that the author was like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to write something that people will use Freudian analysis to analyze. Sometimes yes, but it doesn't mean they had to. So, but there's a lot of suggestion in this one. So you can also look at this whole scene. It does all get very biblical right now. And certainly you can look at the sow as a maternal image, of course. That's horribly slaughtered, and it offsets everything. You can also see the pig as this sort of maternal, mother of nature, because once she's murdered, nature really takes a shift here. And Simon is the one that feels it because he's the one most in tune with nature. You see where I'm going with this, right? So there's several ways you can interpret that scene of the murder of the sow. And I'm calling it a murder because of the way they went about it. It wasn't just a hunt to eat. It's not. It is a violent assertion of power and dominance over nature and over this island as well. Make no mistake about that. And then, of course, they decapitate the pig. And here, not necessary. What they do is not necessary. I get it. You're on an island. You've got to eat. I get it, man. You do not have to. This is going to be the quote that comes out of this. You don't have to cut off the pig's head and stick it on a stick. But truly, and it's such a grotesque image, right? And it's creepy when it happens, right? Because there's, this is on page 137. Instinctively, the boys drew back too, and the forest was very still. They listened, and the loudest noise was the buzzing of flies over the spilled guts. And this is after this big violent chase through the brambles and everything else. And then this is so creepy, y'all, because it's quiet and it's just, that's what they hear. And flies go to dead things. Flies go to things that are rotten or bleeding. This is what flies are drawn to. There's a fantastic poem. I'll read it to you tonight. Emily Dickinson, that is on this very same theme. That's the poem we'll end with tonight. So I'll get back to that. And Jack, when he speaks, he whispers, "Pick up the pig." This is so creepy, y'all. Maurice and Robert skewered the carcass, lifted the dead weight, and stood ready. In the silence and standing over the dry blood, they looked suddenly furtive. Interesting word choice. Furtive. Jack spoke loudly. "This head is for the beast. It's a gift." The silence accepted the gift and awed them. The head remained there, dim-eyed, grinning faintly, blood blackening between the teeth. All at once they were running away as fast as they could through the forest toward the open beach. So there's still a fear within. I think that as you read this book, sometimes it's easy to forget that these are children. These are young people. We're not talking about a bunch of 18-year-old young men who are abandoned on an island. These are children. And so when they talk about these fears and the beast and everything else, that's, you remember being a kid, I hope, and all those kinds of fears. And, I would, if it were dark and I had to go downstairs to get something in the house, I would run like heck back up those stairs to get to my room. Like, for no reason. It's just what it is. But they run away from it, right? And Simon's there, right? Because this is near his place of beauty that had been such a place of beauty at the beginning of the novel. And so Simon's there. And here we go. Simon stayed where he was, a small brown image concealed by the leaves. Even if he shut his eyes, the sow's head still remained like an afterimage. The half-shut eyes were dim with the infinite cynicism of adult life. There's a commentary on the adults they look up to so much, right? They assured Simon that everything was a bad business. "I know that." Simon discovered he'd spoken aloud. He opened his eyes quickly, and there was the head grinning amusedly in the strange daylight, ignoring the flies, the spilled guts, even ignoring the indignity of being spiked on a stick. He looked away, licking his dry lips. A gift for the beast. Might not the beast come for it? I think the argument is that the beast already has. The head, he thought, appeared to agree with him. "Run away," said the head silently. "Go back to the others. It was a joke, really. Why should you bother? You were just wrong, that's all. A little headache, something you ate, perhaps. Go back, child," said the head silently. And then Simon looks up at the sky, and he sees clouds up there, and he describes them as bulging towers that sprouted away over the island, gray and cream and copper-colored, and he had not seen the clouds before. It says this: for once the clouds were there, and they were sitting on the land. They squeezed, produced moment by moment this close, tormenting heat Even the butterflies deserted the open space where the obscene thing grinned and dripped, right? So you have this beautiful area where the sun's coming down, the butterflies are flying all around, right? And then the sun becomes too hot, and then this horrible, violent thing happens, and then this piece of nature is so horrifically slaughtered and then put on display, right? A gift for the beast, like for what the beast inside of you. It's complicated. It's super complicated, right? And here's Simon, and he lowers his head and keeps his eyes shut and shelters them with his hands. And then it's just a reiteration of the flies that are buzzing around, and how the flies found Simon, and how they go all over him, right? So now Simon too is covered in flies, which, all right, people, let's just lay this out. If a beloved, vulnerable character who represents or who has a connection with something like nature in this, there's a battle between Jack, these boys, and nature as well, right? And who's the dominant. And Simon is the one that's really attuned with nature. And yet, Jack is attacking nature, killing it, slaughtering it, putting its head on a stick. And now all the flies are all over Simon. They're all like in his sweat and up his nose and on his thighs and all over. This is not a good sign for Simon. If a character is swarmed by flies who are flying from a dead carcass to a character, it's not good news. All right. And then, of course, page 143. "You are a silly little boy," said the Lord of the Flies. "Just an ignorant, silly little boy." Right? Now, this whole bit with the Lord of the Flies, so the pig head on the stick, which is what people often remember about this book, is referred to as the Lord of the Flies. And the Lord of the Flies is a translation of the Hebrew Beelzebub. There's some notes in the back of my book that are really intriguing on this point. It has been suggested that it was a mistranslation of a mistransliterated word, which gave us this pungent and suggestive name for the devil, a devil whose name suggests that he's devoted to decay, destruction, demoralization, hysteria, and panic, and who therefore fits in very well with Golding's theme, right? And so the pig's head on the stick, the Lord of the Flies, is meant to be associated with Beelzebub, or the devil, right? And so if you look at some of the symbolism with Simon, this innocent, right? The mother pig who's slaughtered in the woods. Now this sort of symbol of the devil, but really like evil as well as savagery, all those things, right? And it's a grotesque image, to be sure. And now it's talking to Simon. And here he is, like in this wilderness. I'm gonna let you connect some dots there. If you can't connect them, that's cool. But I'm just gonna let you think about it. "You are a silly little boy," said the Lord of the Flies, "just an ignorant, silly little boy." Simon moved his swollen tongue but said nothing. "Don't you agree?" said the Lord of the Flies. "Aren't you just a silly little boy?" Simon answered him in the same silent voice. "Well then," said the Lord of the Flies, "you'd better run off and play with the others. They think you're batty. You don't want Ralph to think you're batty, do you? You like Ralph a lot, don't you? And Piggy and Jack?" Simon's head was tilted slightly up. His eyes could not break away, and the Lord of the Flies hung in space before him. "What are you doing out here all alone? Aren't you afraid of me?" Simon shook. "There isn't anyone to help you. Only me. And I'm the beast." Simon's mouth labored, brought forth audible words. "Pig's head on a stick. Fancy thinking the beast was something you could hunt and kill," said the head. For a moment or two, the forest and all the other dimly appreciated places echoed with the parody of laughter. "You knew, didn't you? I'm part of you." Close, close, close. "I'm the reason why it's no-go, why things are what they are." The laughter shivered again. "Come now," said the Lord of the Flies. "Get back to the others, and we'll forget the whole thing." Simon's head wobbled. His eyes were half closed as though he were imitating the obscene thing on the stick. He knew that one of his times was coming on. The Lord of the Flies was expanding like a balloon. And here we have this recognition that Simon has one of his times. And it's never totally clear what happens to him here, but it talks about his tongue being swollen too and how he sees things floating in space. But he feels this happening. This is ridiculous. You know perfectly well you'll only meet me down there, so don't try to escape. This has gone far enough. My poor misguided child, do you think you know better than I do? There was a pause. I'm warning you, I'm going to get angry. Do you see? You're not wanted. Understand? We're going to have fun on this island. Understand? We're going to have fun on this island. So don't try it on, my poor misguided boy, or else. Simon found he was looking into a vast mouth. There was blackness within, a blackness that spread. Or else, said the Lord of the Flies, we shall do you. See? Jack and Roger and Maurice and Robert and Bill and Piggy and Ralph, do you? See? Simon was inside the mouth. He fell down and lost consciousness. Right? But the line here that I really want you to think about and kind of hold in your mind is when the head says to him, fancy thinking the beast was something you could hunt and kill. Right? Because it's not the beast. Right? The man up on the mountain is not inherently the beast, right? The beast is within. The pig is not the beast, right? We often call animals beasts. People call boars beasts, right? The beast is within. The beast is within, right? That head on the stick, it's symbolic of perhaps like an evil or a darkness that's on this island. But that evil and darkness was not necessarily on this island before these boys arrived, right? This island was, the pigs running around and butterflies and the foliage and everything else. And there was the ruins of the fort, which means it had been abandoned, even though clearly like someone at war had been there. But the beast did come from the air, I think. Remember, they landed in an airplane crash, right? Very much, here comes the paratrooper coming down and landing too. So, so in this moment, fancy thinking the beast was something you could hunt and kill, and then it laughs. You knew, didn't you? I'm part of you. Close, close, close. I'm the reason why it's no-go, why things are what they are, right? And it's this revelation, right? I'm within you. Right? You thought the beast was something you could kill. No. The beast is inside of you, right? It goes back to their conversation about being afraid and maybe the only thing they have to fear is people. Maybe so, right? And this raises questions about humanity. Are we inherently good? Are we inherently evil? Are we inherently somewhere in between? And our circumstances are what determine which way we go. If being put in the situation where our lives are at risk, would we kill for ourselves? Would we give over to darkness? If civilization, the structures around us, were taken away tomorrow, would we become uncivilized? Now, there's a lot that we can see, I think, in our world today and in the news that suggests that this beast is not something that you can hunt down and kill, that there is a darkness in people. I'm thinking of the recent event in Georgia, right? In this book, it's the war, okay? What do we do with that? What's the messaging here about the war? Or what's the messaging in this book applied to something like that horrible tragedy and the people who were the perpetrators? That's something to think about. I wish I had answers. And so at the end of this, when Simon, it says he's looking into the mouth. I just love this chapter. My heavens, it's just so well written. I wish I had written it, but I did not. We're going to have fun on this island, so don't try it on. And Simon's looking into this vast mouth. There's blackness within, a blackness that's spread. And so he's looking at the head on the stick, and he tries to hold on, right? He says, pig's head on a stick, like, not seeing this. This isn't real. You're just a pig's head on a stick, and laughter, right? And then this darkness takes hold of Simon. It's so distressing. And so to really discuss that, we have to keep reading to see what happens next and what happens with Simon. There's certainly a suggestion that there is something physically at play with Simon. You know, one of his episodes is coming on, and you know, did he hallucinate this? I don't think that the pig head on the stick was really moving its mouth and speaking. There's nothing else fantastical about this book that would suggest that, and I actually think that would really take away from the commentary on humanity and the reality of humanity in this book. So we have to assume then that this was a projection by Simon. Now, that being said, though, was it a projection from within Simon, or is this part of his communion with nature that is transcendent of the societal structures that have been put in place here, right? Is he able to really see a reality because he is so attuned with nature and all of that? So there's just some things to think about as you finish the book. What is Simon's role? What connection does he have with nature? The Lord of the Flies, right? And the flies are representative of death. So are we talking about the Lord of Death? Is that what the pig's head is, and is that what's inside of us? Is a control over life and death? Because true, we do have that. We do have the power to kill. Like, we have the power to kill. We don't have the power to resurrect. But Lord of the Flies, you know, if you think of it as Lord of Death or Lord of Darkness, and it was created by Jack and those boys through an act of violence, then what is that saying about humanity? And on that cheerful note, we'll call it a night. So you're going to finish up the book for next week, and next week I plan to post to go live on Sunday afternoon, I think. But just stay tuned, because clearly this just happened after I said it would. But we'll be together again. And send any questions and other observations to me, because like I said, I don't pretend to be an expert on Lord of the Flies. It's been since high school that I've read Lord of the Flies, so I'm just, you know, reading along with you and figuring it out, and I'm preventing myself from going and doing a lot of research on it, because I really want to have like an organic conversation with you. But yeah, so next time we'll draw it all to a close. Okay, so I want to end tonight with a poem, and I would like to read a poem by Emily Dickinson that goes along with the theme from tonight. So this is not a lovely poem. Like, if you're just tuning in, we're discussing Lord of the Flies. So this is not like a poem that's gonna make you feel super good, and usually I read those. If you didn't see my video on, which one was it, where I read my very favorite Mary Oliver poem. I can't remember which video it was, but that's a beautiful poem, and it's very uplifting. So if after this poem you want something uplifting, you can go watch that video and read, I think it's called a Summer's Day or a Spring Day. Now I'm losing my mind, by Mary Oliver. But if you Google it, you'll find it's beautiful. It's absolutely stunning. But tonight I wanted to finish by reading a poem about flies, because we're reading Lord of the Flies, and we're talking about how the flies are associated with death. I don't have the poem in front of me, although it's in the other room. I'm going to try to recite it from memory. If I mess up, I will run and get the poem and then get it right. So the poem is titled, I Heard a Fly Buzz When I Died, by Emily Dickinson. I heard a fly buzz when I died. The stillness in the room was like the stillness in the air between the heaves of storm. Hold on, I'm getting the book. Emily Dickinson, where are you? Oh, here. Hey, look, you stayed. Okay, let me find it. I think I probably could. I got really nervous in front of you. I feel like there was a lot of pressure. Okay, here we go. And of course, now I'm going to read the next, 240. Hang in there, people. I almost got it. 245. All right, here we go. If you don't know much about Emily Dickinson, maybe I'll do a little series on her at some point. She's a fascinating woman. There's a show right now on Apple TV you can watch called Dickinson. A lot of it they get right. I found it almost unbearable to watch. After a couple of episodes, I couldn't take it anymore. At first, I really loved it, and I was like, this is going to be great. I'm going to binge the whole show. And then by the third episode in a row, I was like, I'm over this. But they are addressing a lot of things about Emily Dickinson's life that people really haven't talked about over the years. And I think they should. For example, her relationships with other women, that's not addressed in a lot of study of Emily Dickinson. And I think that's hugely important in understanding her and her work and her self-image and all of it. And I'm glad that that's getting some airtime now, because it really should. So if you didn't know that until right now, then you learned something else tonight. But anyway, Emily Dickinson, all of her poems can be read to the tune of the Yellow Rose of Texas. So if you like that, you can pull out some Dickinson poems and sing to your heart's content. But so here's the poem for the evening. I heard a fly buzz when I died. The stillness in the room was like the stillness in the air between the heaves of storm. The eyes beside had wrung them dry, and breaths were gathering firm for that last onset, when the king be witnessed in the room. I willed my keepsakes, signed away what portion of me I could make assignable. And then there interposed a fly, with blue, uncertain, stumbling buzz between the light and me. And then the windows failed, and then I could not see to see. So there's a poem about the moment of death, but it has that same association with the fly. So in case you're like, okay, she's making stuff up. Like, oh yeah, sure, the fly represents death. The fly represents annoying me. I hear ya. But really, it's a symbol. People use it all the time in their writing. The fly is associated with death. It even goes back to Emily Dickinson. We have two different centuries, both using this one. So, just saying. All right, so this poem, I heard a fly buzz when I died. The stillness in the room was like the stillness in the air between the heaves of storm. I love that description, that like utter stillness when there's a storm and it's heaving, or sort of like the eye of a hurricane, and that stillness that's there. But the idea of the last thing that I ever see and hear in this world is a fly buzzing right in front of my face. It's like a nightmarish. That is a thing of nightmares. But listen, all around her, the eyes beside had wrung them dry, and breaths were gathering firm for that last onset, when the king be witnessed in the room. And so the people around have prepared for this. They've already cried their tear. So it's not a sudden death. It's a death that was coming, because the poet, or the speaker, and it's important, the speaker is different from the poet. Okay? The speaker says, I willed away my keepsake, signed away what portion of me be assignable. Right? And so, she had prepared for death. It was coming. And the speaker had prepared, right? But then Dickinson uses a dash. See it there? Right? And pause, because here comes the fly, interposed between the light and me, right? And whether the light means life, like the light of the world, or if the light means like the light of the afterlife, and the fly goes in between. So is it death coming and interrupting, like right in front of her face, and that's the last she ever sees of the world? Or is the fly more of an evil-like figure who comes and gets in between her and the light of eternity? I don't know. But the description is so good of the fly with blue, uncertain, stumbling buzz. Oh, isn't that just a perfect description, right? And if she can see the blue of that fly, it is right in front of her eyes, people. So you have this poem that basically says, you can prepare all that you want for death. You can put everything in order and get everything ready, but you don't know what's actually going to happen in that moment. So there you have it. Thanks for joining in. Thanks for coming tonight. We're going to finish Lord of the Flies for next week. If you're new to this, then no worries. One more week, and then we're going to start reading a new book. We're going to read Sweet Divinity, which is mine. You can order it from Amazon or Barnes & Noble. You can order it from my publisher, Perspective Press, as well. You can buy it locally in Greenville, South Carolina at M. Judson Books. I also have some copies that I can sell if you're local to where I am. And hopefully soon I'll be coming to a city near some of you once we're out and about in the world again. So thank you for coming. It's awesome to see you guys. I love watching your names pop up on there. I see so many people from different aspects of my life, and I'm really grateful that you joined in, even if it was just for a little while. I know I can ramble on. So thanks a lot. Have a wonderful week. I popped in the middle of last week and read a children's book, so I'll probably do that again one night this week as well. You can go back on my Facebook and see that. And I'll see you soon for our big conclusion. Thanks a lot. And special thanks to Jessica for throwing in the bit about the kids and the grown-ups. That was perfectly placed. So thanks, guys. See you soon. Bye.